Welcome to Washington Policy on the Go. My name is David Bose. I'm the Communications Director for Washington Policy Center. And thank you so much for joining us on this summer edition of Washington Policy on the Go. The reason that's important is we're here every other week. During the session, we were here every week with new policy analysis. Now, during the summer months, we will be here every other week. So just keep track of that and watch your inboxes for your latest invites. And do remind your friends, if you miss an episode, you're on vacation, something along those lines, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. We do post complete episodes there on Washington Policy Center's YouTube channel. And if you're confused about where to find that, we have lots of little icons that you can click on our homepage at washingtonpolicy.org and catch up with that. Today, we're going to talk about the exodus from Seattle, indications that people are leaving Seattle and Washington State at large. We'll talk with Mark Harmsworth, our Center for Small Business Director, about that. We'll also talk with him about the new taxes that the latest legislative session have brought to you and the businesses that you frequent or perhaps that you own. We're going to go through the list of different ways taxes were increased and what the impact is likely to be overall, among other things. But let's start with the outmigration of people from Washington and Seattle specifically. Mark, you were taking a look at the pods data. Those are moving pods and how people are kind of shipping out. It's kind of captured the public imagination when you posted about this. Based on when you take a look at this and you see the outmigration and you're trying to figure out what's the reason for that, why would people leave a place that is iconic for its natural beauty, its splendor? It's been well known for opportunity in the past. We have our complete report card for Washington's future indicating there's some problems with opportunity now. But how is it that you interpret this exodus?
Well, I think there's two sort of main categories of folks that are thinking of leaving Washington. You've got sort of the lower income folks that are now just they can't afford to live here anymore. Things are just so expensive that they're just looking at it and going, I just can't do this. And there's a whole myriad of reasons why for folks like that, things around minimum wage and some of the tax increases that we've seen over the last few years are really driving that kind of category of people. Then the other category that are maybe business owners and more independently wealthy folks who are just looking at this saying, and Jeff Bezos is a great example of this, they don't have to claim residency in Washington State. They can still be here for a substantial amount of the year, but they claim residency in a different state. And just a few years ago, Jeff Bezos moved his residency out of Seattle to avoid the head tax that Seattle would put in place, which is facing a $47 million shortfall right now because a whole bunch of other people followed the same route that he did, which was move in the case of the head tax. Amazon moved a whole bunch of their employees over to Bellevue, but the same really applies at the state level. Jeff Bezos moves to Florida, and hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue just disappears from the state's projected income. And Seattle's seeing the same thing. 47, 48 million is their shortfall because they probably already earmarked it for spending it. And now that money's gone. And so this pods report, and pods are those square things you rent when you want to load your house up and move on out. They watch where these pods are going. So they have a fairly good idea of across the board the type of home that is being left and the type of home where they're going, because they've got the address data, so they can see income levels and all sorts of different things. And this particular report shows, the outflux of people leaving the state. So for that first group, it's, high minimum wage, which sounds counterintuitive, but we know that high minimum wages drive up the cost of living. Housing availability, it's the things like rent control. While we've not seen the impacts of that yet, we're about to start seeing that over the next couple of years here, and that's going to drive up the cost of housing even more. You've got the Growth Management Act, that really obscure piece of legislation that was passed 20, 30 years ago that has restricted where and how and the types of housing that we build, again, driving up the cost of living. And then you've got things like the carbon tax and high gas taxes, which are, for Washington State's portion of our gas per gallon, it's almost $1. So the rest of it goes to the feds. But when you're looking at gas prices 430, 450, 460, and you can drive over to Idaho or down to Utah or even other blue states like Colorado, and you see significantly cheaper gas, you don't need to make $100,000, which is now the minimum, the average wage in Washington State for folks, which is just crazy high. You don't need that much money to live because everything costs a lot less. I was just chatting with somebody about the price of eggs, ironically, in a different state, and they're half the price they are here, even now, even after the price. We had the demand for eggs, the supply issues there that drove up the prices at the beginning of the year. We're seeing a fall down here, but it's still fallen further. So when you're looking at housing prices that are half what they are here, you're looking at no liquor taxes or minimal liquor taxes and beer taxes, and you're looking at no RTA car tabs and all the rest of that stuff. People are moving out because of that.
Yeah, you've touched on some of this already, but there are those who will say, "Hey, you know what? It's tough everywhere. It's not Washington State. It's inflation is driving up prices. Prices are going up everywhere. Housing uh, prices have gone up, across the board. So, can you really blame the state policies of Washington for the problems that we're facing?"
Oh,
And
absolutely. Yes. And I'll give you a very concrete example of this. I broke a sprinkler head this weekend and I went out to buy a sprinkler head from Amazon because I was in a hurry and I thought I'll just order a 10 pack of the little black sprinkler heads. This is a first world problem, by the way. So I went on there and they were normally 10 or $15 for 10 or whatever it was. So just $1, 50 per sprinkler head. Well, I found out, and I've actually written a blog about this. I haven't posted it yet, but in 2020, they passed as part of the energy efficiency rules that every sprinkler head now has to have a pressure regulator built into it. Well, what does that do to the cost of sprinkler heads? They used to be simple little round plastic things with a screw in it. Now it's got a complex pressure valve in it. And of course, it's 5 times as much as the old sprinkler heads used to be. So I had to go to the hardware store. And the ironic thing was, I couldn't even get these delivered to my house. Amazon refuses to do it because they're afraid that they're going to get in trouble with the state lawmakers or the enforcers over supplying the wrong sprinkler heads. In fact, it's actually the nut that attaches the sprinkler head to the riser valve that they've banned. How ridiculous is that? And of course, it drove up the price of everything else. This is the kind of stuff they keep doing, nickeling and diming us to death. And while $2 for a sprinkler head or 250 for a sprinkler head instead of 10, 50 cents or whatever it is isn't the end of the world. It's when the cumulative effect of all of these laws, and you'll see this in the blog I put up about the taxes, it adds up and it becomes a big number.
like anything else in life, the small expenses become big expenses cumulatively, and cumulatively, and they have a big impact on your finances, your ability to function. Just like small decisions that you make throughout your life end up being big decisions later, health wise and other things. So um, there's it is frustrating for me because I see that even locally in Tacoma, where there's some levies proposed, and they said we're only increasing this levy, X%, and it worked out to about 25 to 33%, depending on which tax. But it was not a small increase; it was a major increase to a relatively small tax. But cumulatively, again, it's really hitting people hard, and you can see it. And there doesn't seem to be, I don't know what it will take to get lawmakers and others to focus on affordability. One of the things that you pointed out in your blog, Mark, was that a report that it's not just people in lower income brackets feeling the pinch, but it was the middle income as well.
Yeah, if you have somebody who maybe owns a small business or something like that, and they're doing pretty good. Maybe they're a six-figure income in their household. These folks you're obviously seeing that too because the rates are much higher, but the state's putting a lot more taxes on us, like the 2.99% increase in the capital gains and the state taxes and all the stuff that they've done. And I've got all the details in one of the blogs there. But if you're a business owner, it's not that difficult to move your business registration to a different state. All of us have heard about things like Nevada or South Dakota, what have you. But you don't have to go far to start saving money because our taxes are so much higher than everybody else. The business occupation tax on businesses, as an example, is on gross income. So you may be $1 million business, which sounds like an awful lot of money, but if you've got 5 employees and an office to pay for, and salaries and healthcare benefits and paid family leave and all the different things they keep piling on, that $1 million doesn't turn up as $1 million for you. It turns up as $75,000. So, but the tax is on the million. So when they start doing a small increase to the B&O tax, that is massive in taxes for a small business owner. They're going to move their business to a different state. They register in a different state, and then they start avoiding all these taxes that the state's putting on them as long as they keep their residency whole. And the state doesn't then even see some of that revenue. So it's a self-defeating action by the state. Those that can move will. Those that will want to retire someplace will, because they won't want to pay those taxes. And the lower income are moving. So who's left? Well, it's going to be a lot of the middle, lower income folks left to pay the taxes to make up the difference in the money that just left the state. Who's going to pay all that money that Jeff Bezos just walked away, didn't pay taxes on? Because he has the ability just to move to a different state.
Now, your latest blog points out the impact on individuals and on businesses, and you make quite a list of all the different areas where taxes have gone up, and because of the 2025 legislative session. In some cases, you point to the possibility of those taxes going up, not exactly the tax itself or how much the tax is going up. But based on what you've summarized here, how significant is the impact of the 2025 session going to be on somebody who's, getting by on 75,000 a year? And by getting by, I mean, just squeaking by.
Yeah, it's going to be significant. And the issue is, and we talked about business occupation taxes. You may not be a business owner yourself, but you are going to pay those business occupation taxes because no business is just going to say, oh, I'll just give up 3%, 4% of my profit. I'm going to pass that cost on to the consumer of my products and my services. So that's what happens. So, I mean, I've got a list here, a couple examples: sales and use tax. That's obviously on everything. Property taxes, business occupation taxes, that went up significantly this year. Paid family leave went up this year. Fuel taxes, as we've already mentioned, almost $1 a gallon just for the Washington State portion. That doesn't include the feds and so on. Puget Sound Regional Transit, if you're unfortunate enough to live in the RTA, you're paying for that 120 billion so far. Boondoggle of a train that only carries 0.02% of the folks, and not that I'm bitter in any way. Capital gains tax, that went from 7 to 10%. The estate tax, they've done the margin, but they've taken the higher rate on estates over 9 million, which sounds crazy, but your house probably wasn't worth $1 million 20 years ago, to 35%. The state's going to take 35% of your estate that's over 9 million.
By the way, we should remind people that this is the estate that people have been paying their taxes on the entire time it grew in value. So they've been paying property tax, and they've paid every other kind of tax applicable to this property the whole time. And so ultimately somebody dies and suddenly the state says, hey, debt, you're being taxed for your death. We're going to take this away from the people you were earning it for, or maybe the charitable causes you wanted to leave it to, or whatever. So and then
take it away from that. And then when they slipped under the rug a few years ago, the document recording fees up to $300 in some cases. That used to be like a $10, $15, $20 fee. So if you've got multiple document recording fees, you're looking at thousands of dollars in fees that just got added to the cost of housing. So I mean, for those politicians that are out there barking about we want to see affordable housing, then quit taxing everything, because ultimately that's where it's going to end up, is in the pocketbooks of the folks that can least afford it, where they're trying to get a house or trying to rent something, and you keep slapping these fees and increased taxes on there. And that doesn't include any of the utility taxes, obviously, as well.
Well, it's a frustrating thing to see how often that this is being ignored in terms of, people giving the verbal nod to the increase in housing, and then allowing all these smaller increases to keep climbing, which end up, again, compounding into big issues, especially when at every new cost is slicing off the available market for that house. Because so many things are out of the affordable range anyway at this point. So that makes it particularly tough. We got a question coming in from the audience. Is there any concern about Washington State adding clawback taxes on citizens who leave the state and still demand taxes on capital gains from the time when a citizen lived in the state? They've heard that California does.
Yeah, it would be difficult for the state to prove that you cap gains on something that you've already left the state with. I'd like to see that lawsuit in court, because you're no longer a resident of the state. So if you moved out of the state, you're still subject to federal tax, but you're dealing with interstate commerce laws at that point. So it will, I think. Is there a concern is the question. Yeah, I'm always concerned about them trying to do stuff. You see them backdating taxes. In fact, the cap gains tax was backdated to January of this year, even though they didn't debate it until March and April. So they certainly could do that. It would be incredibly difficult unless they had a wealth tax, which they tried and failed to do this year, for them to tax those assets, which is why I think they're pushing for that, so they can tax the unrealized gains on your investments while you're still in the state and try to make money on them. You start thinking about some of the folks that were lucky enough to work for Amazon and Microsoft and earn a lot of stock equity in those two companies. And now the state comes in and says, "Oh, we're going to start taxing you on the basically your retirement fund," because that's what this money ended up being often. That's just terrible. Watch out for that wealth tax. I think that's the mechanism they'll try to use in a short answer to do that clawback, because they can collect that money as they go along.
Mark, one of the collective impact of this a wave of new taxes, you've already mentioned with B&O, the small increase in B&O, because it's not on profits, but it's on gross income, can be a massive impact. I mean, it could mean somebody's not profitable, right? They might finally be clawing their way to profitability and then have that taken away from them because of a small increase on their gross receipts. How do you see this based on the attitude that you saw in the legislative session as a former legislator yourself, remembering that, even though we got a $9 billion plus increase, that doesn't count the transportation budget. We got massive new increases in taxes all over the place. And it's with that record-breaking increase, there was a lot of taxes left on the table and a lot of new increases left on the table. Do you see, based on the attitude and the overall legislative session, do you see those things coming back next session, or do you see this as an overreach, or do you feel like they realize, okay, well, we've extended ourselves this far, we shouldn't go any farther?
What would history show us? I think that many of the taxes that were proposed were, if you like, flags. They were just trying to see how they would float and what the public reaction is, which is why it's really important that when you see something you don't like, that you reach out to your legislator and say, "I don't like this," or "I do like this," depending on what it is. So some of those won't be back. There are others, like the wealth tax, I suspect will be back. You will see increases in and the wealth tax may come back somewhat like a head tax, is my guess. They'll try and do something like that. And the result will be exactly what happened to Seattle. A whole bunch of people will start moving jobs out of the state. And that's primary my concern about those types of taxes. If you start taxing these large corporations, Amazon, Microsoft, to some degree, Boeing and Starbucks, and some of the other larger corporations we have, thankfully, in our state, they're going to turn around and they're going to start moving employees. Amazon has just announced a huge warehouse in Pennsylvania. I don't know how many jobs that's going to move, and they've got a 500 job investment they're making in North Carolina right now. So they're going to start moving employees out of Puget Sound, and that's what they're going to do to avoid some of these taxes, because they're corporations that they don't. For them, it's a profitability issue, and so as much as they care for their employees and want their employees to perform well, they also understand they're going to make a profit too. So they're going to move move folks out of the state, unfortunately. And so if they continue to pursue things like the head tax, you'll start seeing these cash cows that of Microsoft and Amazon and so on start moving portions, if not a large portion of their employees out. If you start thinking about Microsoft, 200,000 employees in the Puget Sound area, if they move even 25% of that, or even 75% of that out to different areas of the US that are more favorable, then you're going to see a massive trickle down effect on small businesses where the money that those high paying jobs, which are driving the cost of housing too, obviously, but those high paying jobs are driving economic activity where they're spending money at the grocery store and the teriyaki joint and the more expensive restaurants, and they're spending money on all these different things. That money starts going away, and you get that trickle down effect of everything starts to slow down. So we have to be super careful. I really hope they see this, because if they don't, we're in for a rough ride. So I do think, excuse me, I do think we're going to see some of those taxes come back. I think they'll come back at lower levels if they come back next year, which is what they did with paid family leave, which you'll notice now is 0.92%, and it started out at a very much lower percentage. So they'll get it in, camel under the nose, camel under the tent, the nose tent thing, whatever it is, the thing. Um, uh, then they'll do that, and then they'll start increasing those taxes as we get in, unfortunately.
The minimum wage doesn't seem to be sinking in with people in terms of its impact. In fact, I was speaking with some folks um, casually at an event, and they were generally pleased by the idea of minimum wage going up in various places in Washington State. And they thought, hey, well, that makes it so that the people that least likely to be employed, they will have more spending money. They'll have this greater ability to take care of their of what they need for living. And you've got a new blog up pointing out that the lessons of the minimum wage, the data is showing something else happening with these increases. Why don't you walk us through that? And then also address, is there a tipping point? Like some would say, well, what would you have us do? Just you get rid of the minimum wage altogether and leave people to be exploited, for a fraction of what they should earn. How would you address those things?
Well, first of all, the minimum wage is not supposed to be a living wage. It was supposed to be a training wage or a temporary job wage. So it's disingenuous for the folks that are pro high minimum wage that they would come out and say, oh, it has to be so that you can afford to live, because it's what's driving a lot of the cost increases. And it's not just the folks that are making minimum wage. What it's doing is putting pressure on the folks that are just above a minimum wage, because employers now feel obligated to increase middle tier employees, up managers and so on, and on their salary. So the overall effect is that wage labor costs go up. And we touched this earlier. Well, the if you're a restaurant and you're making 3% profit on your food, which is that's the average. I mean, high-end restaurants make a little more, lower end don't so much. You make it 3%, and you've got 10 employees in your restaurant, and you have a couple on shift all the time, and your payroll goes up by, some cases $2 or $3 an hour. By 3%, you're out of business, or you increase the cost of your food and prices. We saw this with In-N-Out Burger in California. The minimum wage went up, and overnight they increased the price of their burgers by 75 cents to $1 per burger to recoup the cost of that minimum wage. So you're chasing a carrot on a stick. You're never going to get it if you keep doing it through minimum wage from that perspective. What we need is employees that are improving themselves, so that an employer wants to pay them more to retain them, because once they've got good skill sets, then they're more mobile. They can go to other employers and say, hey, would you like to pay me a little bit more to do this job? I've got these skill sets I've learned on the job, and it improves. That's how it worked for me. I worked my way up through the ranks, if you like, and worked hard to try and prove my worth and prove the reason you want to pay me this money, and I did it that way. But the minimum wage thing, I'm is is it Josh Hawley, the senator that just introduced one at the federal level? Yeah, he's a Republican. Forgive me if I got the name wrong, but He's just pushing that. And I almost want to write to him and say, do you not understand that what you're doing, and the data now shows this Alice report that's in this blog shows that you increase minimum wage, your cost of living goes up, and within 18 months, 24 months, your actual purchasing power is now less than it was when you were making less money. And that story I hear from multiple people I've talked to in all sorts of different industries, particularly in the hospitality industry, when minimum wage goes up and they start introducing these service fees and that kind of thing, their wages go down significantly, to the point where one individual I was speaking to now, instead of making close to six figures on 4 or 5 day week, is now working 6 days a week and makes 2/3 of that. That's a Seattle person that works in one of the higher end restaurants down there because of the way this minimum wage has affected things.
Let's talk briefly about some of the new restrictions on landlords. I hate using that term, the landlord, because it makes the property owner sound like some, you know, some French king from the Revolutionary period who's doesn't care about the subjects. But we're actually talking about property owners who have decided to risk their retirement in order to provide housing for other people, or to try to build their retirement by saving and providing places for people to live and raise family and other things. So, with people that are putting themselves out there, what new restrictions, what are we looking at in terms, not just in state terms, because I know there were some things that were passed at state level, but also some of the localities now seeking added restrictions on people who own property.
Are you saying I'm French, David?
Not you. No.
Je comprends français, monsieur. Yeah, so the states come in and it's a multi-language podcast today.
Right.
The states come in with this rent control, which basically caps the rent increases at 7% plus CPI. And that was a negotiated bill between the Senate and the House of Representatives. The original bill that came out of the House, I think, was at 7%. The Senate proposed a 10% plus 2.9 on rent increases. The problem is that if you, and we've talked about this before a little bit, but if you lose a roof or you're some unexpected price increase because the government right now has control of the rent and not the rent, the taxes, property taxes, and the utility taxes on the bottom end, and then they've told you you can't raise your rent by a certain amount, so they can squeeze you from the bottom. And eventually that margin is going to go away for those that are still profitable after having issues with evictions in Seattle, where the backlog was so long you couldn't get somebody out if they weren't paying, renters Airbnb-ing their apartments. You've got non-payers, you've got eviction moratoriums the state came in with. Why would you want to rent a property in the state from all those perspectives? And yes, some people do, so that's great. But when they put this cap on your cost of running that apartment, you now have to take the full amount every year, whereas before you may not have needed to because you had a good renter in there and you had an agreement. And I know several folks that didn't get their rent raised for years because they maintained and helped the property owner take care of the property, and they were good renters. And so, as a reward, if you like, the property owner doesn't increase their rent by any significant amount, if anything. But now they're being forced to do it because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. So if you don't raise the rent and the roof goes out and you have to shell out $30,000-$40,000 for a new roof on a house, then where's that cost coming from? Well, it's coming right out of the pocket of the property owner. And you'd say, well, you own the property, but that's not the point. The property is an investment. You're trying to turn that into, it's maybe your retirement, or maybe it's part of your income. So you slap a big roof expense on it, you can't recoup that. So that's why you're going to start seeing those rents go 7 plus CPI every single year. And again, it drives that affordability thing again. So, the folks it's going to affect the most are the ones that can least afford it. So suddenly, instead of being a good renter, taking care of the property and seeing moderate increases, they're going to get slapped with a 7% plus CPI every single year. And within a few years, any benefit of rent control will be gone. You'll see a little benefit in the first couple of years, but after that, everything's going to get more expensive again. Excuse me.
And also, there's the city of Olympia looking to, and I'm sure they're not alone in this, looking to restrict the background checks. And this has a similar effect to they're trying to control the the uh, they're trying to control who people can rent to and limit the information that you have so that you can assess your own risk. It'd be like telling an insurance company you're not allowed to look at the properties that you're insuring or find out the medical history of the person you're offering life insurance to. You're just going in blind and expecting a decent result for people. Um, describe what's going on with those considerations and why that kind of forced blindness on people who own homes and want to rent them out is going to cause trouble in the long term.
Well, you set your rent based on obviously the profitability that you want to see out of the property. You base it on what you believe it's going to cost to maintain the property. You base it on your vacancy rate, how frequently you're going to see somebody turn over. And you also base it on the reliability of payment and the type of individual that's in the actual property. You take all that into account as a property owner and you figure out, okay, in order for me to turn a 5% profit on this property over the next 10 years, I'm going to have to rent it at this certain rate. Well, if suddenly you can't tell if the person that is going to go in there is going to be a trouble renter, particularly with bad rental history, if they've been evicted or they've not paid their rent on time or anything like that, then you have to factor that in. So you may still rent to somebody who's a high risk individual for not paying their rent. Maybe they've been in and out of work a lot, but you can assess that in the amount of rent that you charge for the property. But if you don't know that, you're going to undercharge that individual based on the risk, same thing as car insurance. And then when that claim comes due, when they don't pay the rent, you're the one that's out of pocket now, and that 5% disappears. And so you're not running a charity. At the end of the day, you're trying to make some profit on this thing, on this property that you're renting. There's no point doing it otherwise. So it's the level of risk. And when the state comes in and does that, they're really handicapping the property owner from really assessing this appropriately. And then ultimately, if he gets a bad renter, well, what's going to happen? In order to recoup that money that he just lost, he's going to increase the rent further on the next renter. So it's self-defeating from that respect. And when the state's doing that kind of thing, it just hurts rental businesses. I've heard of folks that are not wanting to invest in Washington because of the instability in our market now, and yet rent control was supposed to, remember, it was called rent stabilization, but it really isn't. It destabilized the whole market.
Yeah, I can see how this would operate, especially long term. It's the kind of thing that it will linger a long time in the memories of people who are thinking about building more housing here and what's possible. It's also interesting to note that the state is interested in the backgrounds of people all the time when it comes to hiring, for certain jobs, because there's risk involved if people have, say, a bad driving record and you put them in a school bus, or they have an arrest record and you're making them a police officer.
Police officer.
Yeah, or they have a very high personal debt and you're putting them in accounting. There's all kinds of issues that are there, but the state's not applying them to themselves. They're just applying it to others. Like, hey, these people who own property, they're the bad guys. They're doing this for some sinister reason, instead of, I know why they're doing this. It makes sense, and
I can fix this real fast. It's rent the house next to the politician that makes the decision, and then do no background checks at all on whoever moves in.
Yeah,
that'll solve it real fast.
Yeah, and throw in a lot of small mobile homes in the area as well until they change the tune. So anyway, that was great, Mark. Appreciate all the work you've done on the blogs over the course of the last month. Appreciate you catching us up, and we'll see you probably in a few weeks in Washington Policy on the Go.
All right. Thanks for having me on.
And thank you for watching, everyone. Don't forget, the complete episode will be available on our YouTube channel. If you missed a section, or you want to see the whole thing, or you want to share it with a friend, go to our YouTube channel for Washington Policy Center, and we'll have the complete thing, the complete episode up in just probably 24 hours or so. And we appreciate you watching. We'll see you in 2 weeks here on Washington Policy on the Go. Thank you.
If you found this informative, share it with a friend and consider checking out one of our suggested videos over here. Make sure you're subscribed so that you can stay up to date with the latest policy news from Washington.